Over the past few weeks, we have done several draft grade videos, and within those videos there are usually a lot of comments along the lines of X players should have never been a first round pick because of this reason, and even if they are productive, it is usually diminished due to a positional value or their fit within the team that drafted them. And in today's video, we are going to be discussing a couple of NFL players that either A, should have never been a first round pick, or B, at least nowhere close to as high as they were, but were first round picks, and some were very high first round picks at that, and not surprisingly, have disappointed. And to give an example of this, if this isn't clear, there are people that comment and suggest things like, oh, Saquon was drafted number 2 and Josh Allen was drafted number 7, so because of how productive Josh Allen's been, Saquon's grade should be an F. And that's not a direct correlation, but this video will be geared more towards that than a normal draft grade video that we've done. Some of the players in today's video may surprise you, so without further ado, let's begin. And there are plenty of picks over the past couple of years from this team that would fit the bill for today's video, so we'll go ahead and knock them out of the way, and it is the Las Vegas Raiders and a few of their selections. If any Raiders fans are watching this video, well, it's not all bad, but the main two I want to highlight are Damon Arnett and Jonathan Abram. And I'm sure there's probably some people thinking, why not Cleland Pharrell? And the reason for that is he was drafted about half a round early. There wouldn't have been a lot of people that would have believed you on draft night if you said Cleland will fall out of the first round. It was 100% more believable that he would be a top 10, or even as we saw, a top 5 pick with the then Oakland Raiders, because he was viewed as a high floor player, and Oakland thought they were getting a consistent 7 to 9 sack player, and of course within that, a great locker room guy on top of it. But with Damon Arnett here, there were, and this is not an exaggeration to say, several players in the secondary on the board, and the reason we say secondary versus just corner, which of course was Damon's position, and unfortunately for Raiders fans, there were also several corners on the board better at the time as well, not just secondary members, is because the next draft, we saw the Raiders take safeties with 2 of their first 5 picks in Trayvon Merrick from TCU and Tyree Gillespie from Missouri. Also, please note I did not include Divine Diablo because he is now a linebacker. But back to Arnett for a second. They drafted a player hovering around the 90 to 100 mark in terms of overall player rankings, and if they were going to reach, they could have at least drafted a Xavier McKinney, who Giants fans know as a very good underrated safety, or Kyle Duggar from the Division II Lenoir-Rhyne, who also has been a very good player for them. Both players were viewed in the late 20s to mid-30s in terms of overall player rankings. And even if you wanted the best of both worlds, you know, a hybrid player, well, the 2020 NFL Draft also had that with Antoine Winfield Jr., who has been a great second-round pick for the Bucs. And whether or not you like him is something else, but Trayvon Diggs just had an 11 interception season. I know there's a lot of yards in there and everything else, we're not getting into that, but to make matters worse, Arnett was released for off-the-field issues, but in well over a season's worth of work, he was never going to prove to be worth the 20th overall selection, much less over several other DBs that were also, by the way, viewed much higher than he was as a draft prospect. Now, one pick, I will go ahead and get this out of the way as well. One pick I will not knock is the Henry Ruggs because of how much of an outlier that situation is, and that specifically does not fall back on John Gruden and Mike Mayock. This next one is surprising, and it's from one of the best organizations in all of football that you usually don't see on these types of videos, and it's the Baltimore Ravens in their first 2018 selection, which was Lamar Jackson. I'm kidding, actually it was tight end Hayden Hurst from South Carolina. Obviously, the Ravens needed some help at tight end, as at the time, they had current Cardinals tight end Max Williams, who was a second-round bust for them, as he had just 47 catches in 3 years, which, obviously isn't good. They had a 37-year-old Ben Watson in 2017, and they had 52 career catches and has traditionally been used as a blocker and a 6th lineman, and that is Nick Boyle, and he's not a receiving tight end. The problem that I had with this selection and where it was Hayden was a prospect that was 25 years old, And whenever a player is going on 24, as in they will turn 24 during their rookie season, you hear that start to come up, and it becomes a bit of a knock on their draft grade. And you will hear that, by the way, with Kenny Pickett in a couple of weeks, if you haven't already heard that, aside from the hand size. The age will come up with Kenny. Now, Hayden is 25 in this draft process, let alone 24, and my problem wasn't addressing the position, because we know they needed to do that after the tight end room they had in 2017, and you also had to look at what Baltimore was trying to do heading into 2018, which was have one last true Super Bowl run with Joe Flacco, or at least an attempt at one. And yes, they did select Lamar later that night at pick 32, but it was pretty known Flacco was going to be the guy, either A, until he got hurt, or just B, flat out lost the job. But the problem that I had with this pick was, when do you ever truly see a dominant tight end rookie season? And yes, Kyle Pitts is very clearly an outlier, because you don't see tight ends selected in the top 4. TJ Hawkinson was drafted 8th overall, had 120 yards in his debut, and finished the rookie season with something like 355 yards. That's my point. So I never liked the idea of selecting both a 25-year-old draft prospect and one at a position that is known to take at least usually a year or two to develop. And if you look at this long term and say Hayden has a productive 2021 season, he's now on the Falcons by the way, but say he's on the Ravens all this time, you're looking at a second contract that will have him play well into his 30s, and you're probably looking at a contract like the one Mark Andrews received, which was a 4-year, $56 million extension, with 14 of that eventually being paid to a 33-year-old tight end. Now, of course, the Ravens would have done everything to protect themselves long term, and if there was $30 million, we'll say guaranteed, of that 56, then it would have been in the first 2 years, where at the point if Hayden Hurst gets injured, then they will just cut him because they don't want to pay $14 million to a said 32 or 33-year-old tight end. Now, eventually, as I started this off, I usually praise the Ravens and the decision they make, and there's a reason for that. Mark Andrews was selected the next day on day 2 of the draft, and he more than panned out and is now an elite tight end of the NFL. If you guys don't know, fun fact by the way, I always love looking at trades and what picks are eventually used, and Hayden Hurst was traded for a second round pick, which was eventually used on J.K. Dobbins, who everyone expects to be an absolute beast when he comes back from this ACL tear. And yes, this did work out for the Ravens, but the whole 25-year-old tight end in the middle of the first round to me was never a slam dunk, even when they made the selection. Now, full disclosure, I want to toss Saquon Barkley in this video, but I will not, because it is not fair to what the title of the video is. The Giants were coming off of a horrible season and selected a running back number 2 overall. Now, what I'm not saying is, oh, they should have known Josh Allen or Lamar would be this good and they should have taken one of those guys, because I'm not saying that, but that team was horrible and they had no business taking him number 2 overall, and the results have showed that even when he's healthy. They are not a good football team. But the next pick we are going to discuss is from back in 2017, when the San Francisco 49ers selected linebacker Reuben Foster from the University of Alabama. The 49ers over the past couple of years have in a lot of ways been similar to the Baltimore Ravens, where they generally do a lot of things right, and you never see them make just flat out stupid decisions or have very bad draft picks, aside from 2017 that is. But this one, looking back, where there was smoke, there was most definitely fire. To my knowledge, Reuben was the only player over the past half-decade to be kicked out of the combine due to behavioral issues, and the quote from the media was, quote, "He was sent home after getting into a heated argument with a student hospital worker while receiving his medical exam at the combine. He objected to the way he was being treated and was sent home before being able to meet with any NFL teams." End quote. I mean, guys, this is the most important job interview, or interviews, because of where he was going to be selected. There were going to be multiple teams interviewing him, of his entire life. Now, obviously, I don't know what happened, but how bad does it have to be kicked out of the combine and for you to, with no joke here, millions of dollars on the line, because there was very serious thought Reuben could have been a top 5 or 6 draft pick as an inside linebacker, and that's a very rare accomplishment in itself. And unfortunately for him, the trouble followed him into the NFL. There were other players on the board at the time that the 49ers could have used, because they were not a good football team coming out of the Chip Kelly, Jim Tom Sula remnants, and were in the first draft of the Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch era. And the fact of the matter is, teams, as we saw, most definitely took him off or just simply put him way down on their draft boards. And we would have eventually seen a team say, look, like, I know there's a lot of baggage with him, but he is a very talented player and was once thought of to be a top 5 pick. So if we take him in the 4th round as kind of a flyer, that would have been acceptable. But 31 overall was something completely different. The red flags were well known before he took a snap in the league, and that pick solidified a horrible first round for San Francisco of Solomon Thomas at 3 overall, and of course Rubin at 31. Now, at least credit where it's due, they did draft George Kittle later in the 2017 draft, and the selection of Foster was eventually in a way kind of covered up due to the pick of Fred Warner the next year, who is one of the best, if not the best, inside linebackers in all of football. But if in the next few days someone gets kicked out of the combine, they will be nearly fully removed from teams' draft boards. And my comments on earlier on him about getting mistreated at whatever the medical situation was, even if you have the platform to be able to say later, like, hey, this is what actually happened, and have the NFL look into it. The wrong way to handle this was become the story of the combine, and not in a good way. Again, credit San Francisco for how good they've been since that 2017 draft, and especially the first round, but that was truly baffling at the time, and of course still is now. But anyways, that's all I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. We will soon be diving into NFL draft content, which I cannot wait for, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.